Welcome to Ocean Stories, a podcast hosted by me, Lydia Carey,
and me, Sarah Hersping. We may not be marine experts or even professional scuba divers, but we are curious about the ocean and ways to protect it.
Every week, we chat with conservationists, researchers, business owners, and anyone else with an ocean story to tell.
So whether you're a scientist or someone who's simply curious about the big blue, you're in the right spot. We can't save the seas alone,
but we can do it together.
Welcome back!
Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday! You guys loved our shark trivia, and we love that you loved it. If you want more of those, we should record more. What should we do next? Whales? Killer whales? I think Lydia's going to quiz me next, so I should pick something that's easy for me. If you are interested in any specific topic, reach out to us, let us know, and we will make sure to bring these absolutely well-studied facts straight to you.
Straight from the credible sources. And we were both kind of sick during our last recording. We were both not feeling well. So next time we're going to be coming with high energy and hopefully good health. And then it's going to be amazing.
We also went sailing this weekend and it was so fun. I'm obsessed. All I want to do is go sailing now. It was really awesome. Huge catamaran and it was cool. We got to hoist the sails, even though we just had to press a button. No, you actually had to pull up one.
Somebody asked me like, oh, so did you finally learn how to sail? Because you've been wanting to do that for so long. And I was like, yeah, I learned to press a button. No, I learned some other things too, but it was a really fancy boat. And there was a button that was unfurling the sails and a rope that you had to pull. So it was very, very casual and calm. It was also not that windy as well.
Yeah, I'm always I feel like whenever I talk to people are like, oh yeah, it's kind of not easy, but you get the hang of sailing quite quickly in the beginning. And then obviously it takes a long time to actually be a good sailor and super safe, but we're just talking about the basics. But I was steering the boat and I was like, okay, so we have to be between 30 and 60 angles because that's how the wind is hitting the sail. And then we need to check the apparent wind speed versus the normal wind speed. But if the wind turns, then you're not between the 30 and 60 degree angle because that's just how the wind hits the sail right now. And my brain just went into complete shutdown. I'm like, how is this supposed to be easy to learn? This is a math equation I'm refusing to understand right now. What do you mean? I don't know what this means. So
you did a great job though.
Yeah, but obviously someone was telling me exactly what to do. So I feel like it's very complex, but I don't know. We'll see because I'm hooked. I want to keep sailing. I want to learn more. That was really cool.
You got to get a Dramamine. You got to find some motion sickness medication that works for you.
Oh my god, I remember taking, it was called Sea Legs in New Zealand, and after trying a bunch of different ones, and that one was just so good, and I've never found it anywhere else, so maybe, I don't even know if that was the actual name or if people just called it that, so who knows, but yeah, if someone knows of really good seasickness medication or motion sickness medication in general, because I'm horrible in any moving vehicle / roller coaster / anything. I sometimes legitimately get seasick on a surfboard sitting in the lineup. I'm not even kidding you. But yeah, that was our weekend. I did a little bit, I skated a little bit more, twisted my knee. So, moral of the story, do not go to the pump track day 3 of learning how to skate. I was a little bit overly confident, maybe. Lydia is a pickleball player now.
The rules are actually quite more complicated than I thought. I thought it would be just ping pong vibes. But I'm excited to go to but it's kind of not.
Is it tennis? I'm confused. I don't really know a lot about it, but I imagine it to be very tennis meets paddle.
I have never played tennis, so I can't speak to that, which was part of my problem, I think. But I'm going to my first real game on Wednesday, so I'll fill you in on whether or not I can actually play well. I'm not the sportiest. Well, that's not true. I just team sports I struggle with because I hate disappointing the other players.
Wait, do you play in pairs?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. So hopefully whoever my teammate is very patient and understanding. And we'll
Wow,
see how it goes. Maybe I'm going to be a champion. You never know.
you never know. Well, turning it around to today's episode, I feel like this is actually funny. I was just going to say, I feel like you're an artistic person, which I cannot paint for the life. Like, if you saw me painting, you would literally think something's wrong with me. Um,
I do enjoy painting a lot, but my paintings are very bad. It's more of an exercise in creativity and something fun to do. It's very satisfying to create,
I feel like
but
you're painting abstract things. I don't know why, but I remember that when we used to work together, we had this chat where we would just randomly put stuff in that we were up to. And I feel like you painted something where a whale was flying through a window. Maybe that's wrong, but that's
yes,
just
no,
what's stuck in my brain.
I do. I paint weird stuff because when I try to do, like if I were to try to paint pretty flowers, it would look really juvenile. In my old apartment, I used to have these watercolors that I did decorating one of the walls. And one time the landlord came over to fix something and I had all these paintings up and he knew that I had an 8-year-old sister and he said, "Oh, did your sister do these?"
And you're like,
They were my paintings that I had worked super hard on. And he was like, "Oh, did your baby sister paint these?"
can we
And
see
I was
photos
like,
of that?
"No." Maybe I have some in the archives that I could pull out, but I always tell that story because I think it's hilarious. But I enjoyed painting my little lemons on a vine, so he can just calm down.
That is so freaking funny. Well, today we're talking to someone who actually knows how to paint.
Yeah, we're
I
talking
was
to an insanely
starstruck.
talented person.
I looked through her Instagram and I was like, I just can't believe that someone is able to paint that. It's so crazy that people can do something like this, like paint ocean creatures. Some of them in like real size, like true to size, so incredibly detailed and so perfect as almost as if it was photographed. I'm like, how is that possible? Like that's so far from anything I can imagine doing. It's so cool.
Our guest for today is Janavi Kramer. She is an internationally acclaimed artist and scientific illustrator with an enduring fascination for the ocean. Her work paints a window into the world below, capturing the unparalleled wonders of the sea, in the hopes of inspiring curiosity and connection in those who look through it. Very cool. Beyond the surface of her art, she is working towards a bigger purpose, which is to shed light on the imminent threats imposed on the marine environment and its inhabitants. Through her paintings, she tells the stories of these creatures and the challenges they face, helping others to recognize the vital role the ocean plays in our ecosystem. At the forefront of her work is a mission to use art to help protect the one thing we cannot live without, the ocean. Sarah and I could not be more aligned with her vision, and it was super cool to talk to an artist about her process, the way that she gets inspired, the way that she makes these scientifically illustrated, accurate paintings. And we also talked to her about how she even got connected with the ocean in the first place.
Let's jump right in.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Welcome, Jan, to season 2 of Ocean Stories. Where in the world are you right now?
So I'm actually based just outside of London, very far from the ocean. But yes, I've grown up in the UK and I've always been in and around London. So yeah.
Sarah's a big London fan.
Oh yeah, London is my favorite European
I've
city.
never been though because I've heard it's like cloudy.
Oh yeah, it is not sunny, right?
I don't know,
It,
but I want to go.
it
Sunny
is it's
London.
it's actually really sunny today after having months and months of what seems like endless rain and dark skies. It's actually started to get a little bit sunnier now, so definitely picking up the mood a bit.
That's amazing. Yeah, I actually one of the first times I met my boyfriend was in London and it was the sunniest it's ever been and it's like, okay, we're onto something because I've only experienced London in the rain. I was like, something's happening.
I want to
I'm
go
kidding.
because the accents are just
You
beautiful
have to
to
go.
me.
Oh, I love it.
Anyways,
Anyways, back on track. So, growing up in the UK and living around London, what connected you to the ocean, or how did you fall in love with the ocean?
I think for me, being sort of immersed in nature and being sort of obsessed with the sea from quite an early age actually came from my grandparents lived near the coast in the north of the UK, so almost every school holiday was just going up and just sort of rock pooling, paddling, and stuff like that. So I think my love of the ocean started from a really young age. And I think as I grew up, that kind of got worse. And I just sort of like every holiday or like trip, I would sort of try to make it so that I could spend some time by the sea. So yeah.
With that in mind, have you ever considered moving to the sea? Because especially there, like, you could live by the sea in England, right? Or do you like to cherish it as like a vacation-y?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually something I'm in the middle of the process right now. We're actually, me and my partner are trying to relocate to by the sea. I think it's one of those
Oh,
things, isn't it? Like, it's just such a different way of living. And I think when you're sort of that close to nature and having it on your doorstep, it really kind of encourages like a slower pace of life. And I think as an
totally.
artist, I spend a lot of time working at my own pace and working at sort of what feels right and stuff. I was never built for the sort of corporate world and stuff, which I have been in before many moons ago. But yeah, I think it is something that I'm actually actively pursuing at the moment because it just sort of feels like the right place for me to be.
That's so exciting. There's nothing better than making the move. Like, I lived landlocked for so long and then randomly happened to now live really close to the ocean. And I feel like my life has changed for the better. Like, everything is just better now. And I didn't even know.
Totally. I'm not an artist, but I feel like I'm a creative gal. And when you have like beautiful plants and just sunsets and just nature, like you said, it really inspires you. Like it's just such a source of like, I don't know, beautiful wisdom, inspiration. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about you, not my inspiration and my wisdom I get from nature. You mentioned that you have a past in the corporate world. What's that about? And also, now you are an artist. We said that. You are a scientific illustrator. So, how did you get from point A to point B?
It was a bit of a winding road, actually. So my very early background is actually in theatre. I trained as a physical theatre performer, um, and quite quickly realised that it sounds a bit ironic now because obviously I'm also an artist, which is not renowned to be the most wealthy profession there is. But I quickly realised that there wasn't a lot of money in acting unless you sort of became an A-list celebrity. So I then kind of followed a route into theatre management and events, and spent a few years doing that. But I kind of over a period of time sort of realized how I'd lost all the creative elements to my job. And though I loved working with people and I loved the idea of, theatre and storytelling and how like events can bring people together, which was a really great part of that job, it didn't feel right that I'd suddenly shut the door on everything that was creative. So actually that's kind of how my art business started, because I started doing it on the side, alongside my corporate and management job, to sort of keep that part of my like inspiration alive and to have that, to be able to like compartmentalize those two different parts of your life, when you feel like you're just stuck in the grind and you need like a release or somewhere to express yourself. And then my business kind of grew from there, and I was really lucky and in a very privileged position to be able to then let that job go. Um, so I've been doing my art business now full time for about 6 years. And it's, yeah, definitely challenging, but it is also the most rewarding job I've ever had, which I absolutely love, of course.
So, for everyone who's listening who does not know anything about you, can you explain a little bit what your art is about and what your art business is about?
Of course. So, I am known and recognised as being an artist and a scientific illustrator. And as you might have guessed already, my work is very much inspired by my ridiculous obsession and fascination for the ocean. I work primarily in watercolour, and I use my work to kind of showcase the wonders of the ocean and the magic that you find there, with the mission and the intent to not only educate and encourage other people to care for the ocean, but also to inspire change and action. Um, I like to think of my work as basically painting a window into the world below, and I do so with the sort of hopes of inspiring curiosity and connection and empathy for those that like look through it, if you will. Um, every piece is really different. A lot of what I present on like my social media platforms and stuff are tend to be highlighting a specific species, but my work archive as a whole is quite varied, and there's a lot of different pieces that I create behind the scenes. But the beginning of every piece always starts in the same way, and it's about finding that connection, because connecting to my work is like a really crucial element, and I believe that's the only way that I can let the people that see my work also feel emotionally engaged to what I'm doing. And for me, that kind of really taps into what's more important, like below the surface, which is for me to shed light on like the looming threats that are impacting the marine environment and its inhabitants. So I guess, yeah, I use painting as a way to tell the stories of all the marine creatures and the challenges they face, and hopefully help others to recognize the vital role that the ocean plays in our ecosystem as a whole, and giving the viewer, or the person seeing my work, the opportunity to stop and think, and even if it's just starting a conversation with someone or going home and googling and something, it's just to inspire them to engage that much more with ocean conservation.
Well, your art is beautiful. I have been stalking your page. I love watercolors.
So
I'm
pretty.
always so impressed because I can't do watercolors very well. But I've seen mentioned on your page this term artivism, and I think you kind of just explained it right now, that artivism is like using art for activism, and I feel like it's super underrated as a route to inspire change.
Yeah, so artivism is actually kind of a term that's relatively new in the art world. I think it came about in the 1990s, but in its essence, it's been around for a lot longer. And it's basically the concept that art as a form of activism, and whether that's using the art to communicate a message about something, whether that's political, environmental, and so on. I guess at its core, artivism is about change and storytelling and finding a way to turn words or an issue into action and inspiring people to want to engage with a topic.
I feel like it's what you just said, like such a powerful tool, and like especially a powerful tool for people maybe that live landlocked. We talk about that kind of a lot, how it's so important to get people that don't have access to the ocean every day and don't see it with their own eyes every single day to still like
Have
have
the
them part of
window.
it. Like
Look through the window. I love
exactly
that.
what you just said. It's so cool. So yeah, that's an amazing way to do that. I'm curious, so how do you get most of your inspiration? Do you sometimes, because I know that you paint like all sorts of sea creatures that you probably won't be able to see at the coast in the UK. So where do you source your inspiration? Do you sometimes go on trips and actually spend time in the water, or is it mostly through like media? Like where do you get inspired and choose the next creature or the next painting?
I mean, as I said earlier, I think being immersed in nature and the ocean specifically has been something that's always been very present in my life. And I grew up spending a lot of time in nature. And I also grew up with my mum, who's also a fantastic artist. So I've always had this sort of connection with both. And for me, when those two worlds really collided is when I first started diving. I've been a diver for about 10 years now. And for me, I mean, if you go, who any of your listeners or yourselves, like anyone that has dived knows that feeling of when you first go in the ocean. It's like in a matter of moments, it's like your whole world gets turned upside down. And, for me, I was just in such complete awe of all the beauty that was surrounding me in this weird alien environment and all these like strange sensations kind of thing. And it's kind of almost like a sensory overload. So for me, from then on, I was just hooked, and it's all I really ever do or want to do. Whenever I'm earning money through my art, it often just goes back into diving, and planning my next sort of trip. But I would say that diving is definitely my sort of gateway to having that first-hand experience for my inspiration for my work. and diving in particular kind of opened my eyes to the wonders of the ocean. Like, it's such a unique privilege and experience to have that opportunity, and it's something I've always wanted to share with other people as well. And like you said, when you're landlocked or you may not have, the access, wherever your circumstance may be, not everyone has that opportunity to go diving. So by creating this gateway into that world, it's kind of been my mission to kind of take people on these dives with me. So when I can, I would love to always use my own like photos and videos as my reference images, but I also work quite closely with a lot of photographers and videographers, and I reach out to them because it's always really important to remember that, especially in the art community, that photography and videography is a very equal and incredible like art form that requires a huge amount of skill and talent and all the rest of it. So I always reach out to photographers and ask if I can use their pictures as inspiration. And it's quite interesting because I think I do love using reference photos, but being able to paint from my own experiences is much better, because being able to bring something to life off the paper, you have to understand how it moves, you have to understand their personality, how it engages with the ecosystem. Is it the biggest predator that all the fish are swimming away from, or is it something that's just like a little boxfish bobbing around in the coral? They have such different personalities, which I think, unless you have that experience, you don't necessarily appreciate how much their personalities stand out underwater when you're with them there. So yeah, definitely most of my inspiration comes from diving. And it's my favorite place to be, underwater, that's for sure.
I'm curious about your journey of being an artist, a full-time artist for 6 years, you said,
Yeah.
and how that's been, because I think a lot of people would love to do that. And was it always the ocean animals and ocean scenes? How has that been from the start to today? Because I would imagine it's been a joy to watch it grow.
Yeah, I mean, to give you the context of it, I have been full time for that for that long, and it is absolutely a labor of love. And when I first started, it wasn't that easy. I would say it's only really become more of a natural flow of my day-to-day routine in the last like 2 to 3 years. And I think obviously COVID had a big part in that, because I was able to just only focus on that. When you couldn't go out of the house, it's all I did, and it was my like escape as well, being able to dedicate that much time to doing what I love. But to give you the context of why I pushed through and persevered through the harder times when you first start a business, which any business, if you start it on your own, is really challenging. But for me, going back to like the diving, sadly, on many occasions, I basically saw firsthand the impact that humans are having on the ocean. And it started off as like little things, but the moments began to stack up. And so it was kind of a slow burner, but I took the time to kind of process that and figure out how and what I could do about it as a person, as a diver, as a conservationist. Like, how can I have a positive impact on that and make a change? But looking back on it now, like the experiences are really, some of them are really sort of like heart-wrenching for me. Like, for instance, like manta rays are my like thing, that like I love manta rays more than anything. And the first time I got to see one quite early on when I started diving in Indonesia, I was just so excited, and I couldn't wait to get underwater and see these mantas at the feeding station. And then as one came gliding over the feeding station, I remember, tears filling up in the mask and being all emotional. And then in that same moment, you saw it opening its mouth to sort of like filter feed and all the rest of it. And then just wafts of plastic bags started coming in on the current. And I find it really difficult to explain how kind of difficult that moment was for me, because it's like I had waited years to see this, and then there it was, and then there's some human impact that could potentially have a really harmful effect on this marine creature. So I think that kind of was my catalyst for changing my career from where I was, which is a really different world from where I am now. And I think from then on, I really started to feel something shift inside of me. So when I started out running my own business and being a freelance artist, it is really tough, and that's just the reality of running your own business. You know, it's not just being an artist, it's wearing many hats, you know, being a marketer, doing your admin, you know, being your own photographer, videographer, while you're also trying to make the artwork and all of the rest of it, and media and content. It's kind of the hats you wear as an artist are kind of endless. But it is absolutely something, you know, like I said, it's my labor of love, and I do it because there's my mission behind that. After having seen the impact that we're having on the ocean, I kind of saw it as a non-negotiable, that this is what I need to do. And I need to tell the story of the creatures and the environment they're in and how they're under threat. Because I think it's also one of those things that you always think someone else is going to do it. And actually, we all need to start, if we want to sort of stand a chance in protecting the ocean, we all need to take on some of that responsibility and look at ourselves and see what are our skills, what are the things that we can do as an individual to contribute to protecting the ocean.
I'm totally with you, and I love that you said that it was almost like a non-negotiable. I feel like this is a current theme in people in like the activism or sustainable world, because I mean, it is a tough place to make your money in. Hopefully it's going to get easier, because hopefully more people will realize that that's pretty much the only way and the only thing that we can do to protect our earth. But yeah, I feel like we just always hear that it's tough, and it's like a labor of love. And I just, oh, sometimes I just want to tell everyone, like, stop purchasing anything that's not made by a good cause or like part of this. Um, but yeah, this is incredible, and it's very encouraging to hear your story. I feel like, also for ourselves, like the more we hear that people just go for it and follow the passion, hopefully the more people follow and are just brave enough to jump in and be part of it. Um, what would you say? I mean, you already touched on it, but what's like the most rewarding and the most challenging thing that happened to you over the past 6 years? Because I'm sure it was like a whirlwind, just knowing from what we do and from a bunch of other brands, it just goes up and down and up and down, and you just have to push through. Do you have like some key takeaways?
Do you mean in terms of from like am I running a business point of view?
Exactly.
Yeah. I would say, I think probably specifically for me is living for the last 5 or 6 years still sort of outside of London, being in a landlocked area and being self-employed in a business on your own. I think it can feel really like isolating sometimes, if I'm honest, you know, because you see, obviously we're growing up in a time now where everyone's so connected by social media, but predominantly it sometimes feels like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, because you feel like you're trying to figure out how you can make a difference and contribute to, you know, protecting our oceans, but also you're just sort of sat on your own in your studio, which is quite like a surreal kind of contrast, and especially when you are so far from the ocean. I think that's particularly challenging sometimes, because it's quite easy to feel defeated. Um, you know, there are days, you know, particularly early on, where there were days where I would feel like, you know, am I making a difference? You know, can I make any change? But that kind of connects actually to what's the most rewarding part of my business, and that sometimes it's the small wins. Sometimes it's literally someone messaging me saying, you know, gosh, I didn't know that was an issue, or, you know, I've never heard of this before, and now I'm going to stop eating fish, or now I'm going to talk to my friends and family about it. And being able to connect with even just individuals, you know, if you can just change one person's mind, not only is that on its own a huge accomplishment, but imagine the ripple effect that that can then have, is that if that person then takes that stance and, you know, passes that on to their friends or their family. So definitely the hardest bit is just sort of feeling very overwhelmed by the enormity of the scale of the issue, is just, and it's also coming from every angle. You know, you have carbon emissions, you have coral bleaching, you have plastic pollution. It's like you have to pick what's the fight that you're gonna go into battle for, you know. And it's kind of like being able to zero in on that is quite challenging in itself. But I think when you start seeing the change that you can make and the conversations you start with people and inspiring curiosity, so someone else might go, I want to learn more about that, or they weren't aware of it before, or whatever, like things like that for me are really rewarding. And I have to also say, I think one of the things that I've focused on a lot in the last couple of years particularly is collaborating with charities and organizations and supporting their efforts, because they're the people that are literally on the front line, you know, trying to prevent the plastic going into the ocean, or preserving the species, or, you know, untangling them from fishing nets and taking them into rehabilitation and all that sort of stuff. So being able to support charities and organizations like that is definitely a really rewarding part of what I do, and it's something I never thought I would even be able to do as well. You know, little old me in my art studio working with a huge organization on the other side of the world. That's definitely been something that I always get really excited about, because it feels like I'm actively contributing. So that's a really rewarding part of my job as well.
You mentioned earlier that you love to connect with all the pieces that you make, and you have a creative process in order to connect with them. What is that like? What's your process?
So for each painting that I start, I think what people don't often realize, I spend a huge amount of time researching that individual species. And for me, that connection, like I said before, my ideal situation is if it's a creature that I have access to, that I can go and I can visit and I can dive with, because there's nothing really that can top that, because it's kind of like, it's like the difference between looking at a photograph of a person and meeting up with them for a coffee. You like the difference in perspective of how you know that person is worlds apart, because you can often make assumptions. And I think that's the issue we have with, for example, sharks, you know, massively misunderstood, misrepresented. And as a result, we're seeing a huge and scary decline of them worldwide across all of the nearly 500 species of them. And that's because people that aren't within the ocean community aren't necessarily aware of the individual species and the role they play in the ecosystem stuff. They're just going off the things that they see, like a still image of one, and they look terrifying and scary, or whatever the, you know, words that the press and the media use to describe them. And yes, they're apex predators, of course they are, and of course we should always have, you know, a level of respect when you're in the water with them, or whether you're on a boat or whatever. But being able to spend time with them underwater, I think most people would have a completely different view. So my process very much comes from spending as much time as I can underwater, making sure if I've got a project coming up that's locking in on a certain species, can I find a way to spend time with them underwater in that way? And then if I can't, that's when I work with photographers and stuff, being able to have like videos and really good reference images of them as well really helps. And I think the main thing that is really important, not necessarily as much for me, but for people who look at my work, the main thing that I always try to get right is the eyes, because the eyes are the bit that you connect to the most. So it's like, often I kind of always switch it a little bit, but I always either start with the eye or the finish with the eye, because it's the most important part of the painting.
I also love the reference point with the photo. Like, it checks out so much, but I never really heard about it in this context. Like, imagine you're just seeing a random photo of someone and that's what you like base all your ideas off. But that's what we literally do with every creature out there, because a minority of the world is actually experiencing them in their natural habitats, which is so cool. Like, so many people say, like, you have to actually get in the water and swim with whatever you're scared of or whatever you have assumptions about. It's so true. I don't know, like, it was such a simple thing that you just said, but it's a really good
Yeah, I mean, I think
explanation for
it's
what's
kind
going
of,
on.
I think the part of my process that's always really integral to when I'm trying to visualize how the piece will come together is thinking about how I portray their eyes, because the eyes are the part that you connect to the most. And again, it's the same in humans. When you're talking to someone, you feel connected when you're making eye contact. And when you're underwater with species as well, I think those are the most kind of profound moments that you have in those encounters, is when something locks eyes with you and it's suddenly checking you out as much as you're checking them out. And they eyes are the windows to the soul, and I think you get to have a deeper understanding of what that species is and how it exists in the ecosystem. So getting the eyes right on each piece is also really important to me, and I think it's kind of there's lots of different elements to making sure you represent something accurately and fairly, but I think getting the eyes right is the crucial part for me.
Business highlight.
A major issue with a lot of the biggest sunscreen and body care brands is that they are formulating their products with harmful chemicals that are dangerous for human health. We're talking potential carcinogens. We're talking endocrine disrupting chemicals that are hurting human health, that hurt oceans and the marine life that live in them. We have discovered a brand that we're absolutely obsessed with that is working to combat this problem.
Stream to Sea is one of the only brands that is EWG tested, which is a really strict testing for skincare products to make sure that it's reef safe, ocean safe, human safe, and they passed all those things. So their products are 100% clean. We started using almost all their stuff, and we are literally diehard fans and obsessed. It just feels so good to wear something that is totally safe for you and totally safe for the ocean. They have a wide range of sunscreen, which I love all of them, honestly, but my favorite one is the glitter one. It's so cool. Also love their leave-in conditioner, their body lotion. What's your favorite product?
I really like to use their leave-in conditioner. It smells amazing, even though it's fragrance-free. And I also really like their body shampoo 2-in-1. I used to be a non-believer in 2-in-1s, but I actually really like the way this smells and the way it makes my body and hair feel. On the podcast, we talk a lot about supporting brands that are better for us and better for the environment, and Stream to Sea really embodies that. It's a woman-owned brand. Everything is made in the United States. They're based in Florida, and they're always trying to make new products that are safe for us and safe for the environment.
If you're convinced and you want to try Stream to Sea, make sure to use Ocean Stories at checkout to get 10% off and to support our show. Back to the episode.
I could ask a million questions because I just think the creative process really intrigues me, and artists really intrigue me because I'm jealous. Like, I wish that I had that skill. I want to know so many things. Like, how long does it take you to do one piece? That's probably an impossible question to answer. I also want to know, who are your biggest fans? Like, who are your biggest clients, or is there a wide range?
Okay, so it is really difficult to answer that question. How long does a piece take me? Because there are so many variables. And I also work in very different sizes. Sometimes I get requests to paint things life size. So like a leaf sheep nudibranch, for instance, like this big. And even though it's tiny, that can still take a huge amount of time because you're trying to, again, capture the detail, capture the personality, capture the way that their body moves in the current, and stuff like that. So, my work can take anywhere from, I would say, like, the quickest I could do something would be a couple of days. And again, it's also because I work in watercolor. So, like, depending on what effect you want to have, it depends whether you want to blend the layers, whether you want to let a layer completely dry before adding another layer. So there's tons of things that have an impact on that. But I think the longest I've ever spent on a piece to date has been about 5.5 to 6 weeks, and that's sort of painting every day for hours and hours. And that was quite a big piece. That was actually a piece that I created for the Shark Trust for their Oceanic 31 project, which was, well, it's still actually going. It's on a UK tour at the moment, but it's a project to highlight all of the species that are under threat of extinction, and asking each artist to paint an individual species that they feel connected to or inspired by, to sort of highlight that particular species. Actually, there's a print of it there. That was the piece that I created, I was totally thought that was behind me. Um, I chose the scalloped hammerheads because they are under threat of extinction, and when they approached me, I had actually just had this really incredible encounter with them in the Red Sea, and it was the first time I'd ever been underwater with a scalloped hammerhead. And hammerheads are actually my favourite shark, so I was like really excited. And I remember being, again, similar with the manta ray, I was so excited to be underwater when they sort of came out of the blue towards me. Your heart's pounding and you're just in complete awe of this, like, highly adapted, incredible apex predator, and you're suddenly like meters away from them. And I came up from the water and I remember just feeling so inspired by being with them. There was this strange moment that I had to comprehend. When we came up to the surface, I noticed that the dive guide seemed almost sad, and I couldn't quite figure out why. And this dive guide had been guiding in the Red Sea for almost all of his life. He'd been guiding there for about 30 to 40 years, and he almost seemed disheartened from that experience because he was telling us all how even basically year to year there's less and less. And I had come up feeling really inspired by how many I saw, and I thought it was a really positive experience, but I obviously had no context to compare that to. And he was saying how because of industrial fishing and all of the things that are impacting sharks, I mean the list is endless, and that he basically was saying that actually for them as guides it's really sad to see that, because it's a reminder of how rapidly the ocean is changing and how rapidly sharks are disappearing from our ocean. I think the figure is something like 200 sharks are killed every minute, which is just, you can't comprehend that, like every single minute. And so for me, that's why I chose that species, and it was a really amazing opportunity to be able to do it. And the piece was actually very big, so it took me several weeks to do it, and I wanted to make sure I did it just right. So it was things like focusing in on the details of the eyes and how can I paint the eyes in a way that the person viewing the painting really feels like they're connecting with the shark.
I feel like that's such a sad truth that the ocean is changing so rapidly, and we can even see it with our own eyes, because usually with all those phenomenons you hear like, oh yeah, 50, 60 years ago this happened. But I don't know, recently, this is kind of out of context, but recently I went surfing in the morning here in the Pacific in Southern California, and there was actually tons of plastic swimming at the surface, like actual microplastics. And I went to Bali in 2019 and lived there for a while and worked for ocean cleanup. For ocean cleanup. So I had seen it before, but usually whenever I came back here or like visited to the US, it was all clean. I was like, oh yeah, the problem isn't here yet, which is kind of like, remember when COVID started and some countries were like, oh no, there's no COVID in our country yet? You're like, yeah, it is there. We just don't know of it yet, kind of
I
vibes.
think it's really different when the problem comes to your doorstep. It's a very different feeling.
Exactly. I was like, this, when I saw that, I'm still not over it, because I was sitting in like all these little tiny microplastics and they were in the ocean and I had never experienced it on this side of the world. And I was like, well, it's here. It happened. And it's really, really, really hard to reverse this. Like, once it's here, how getting microplastics out of the ocean, we all know, which is just, I mean, it's the same with the sharks and all that kind of stuff. So that really hit home. It was really scary. So, yeah, I can totally understand this guide's feeling, and it's a reoccurring story. Like, a lot of the times when people come on here, they're like, yeah, we've seen it with our own eyes, like massive decline in the ecosystem or whatever it is. So shows again how important your work is, and to like make people aware, like the fact that you just said that 200 sharks are killed every minute. I'm sure most people are not aware of it. And I'm sure a lot of people are not really aware of the solutions or how everything is connected. Like, how is the fact that I'm eating fish connected to industrial overfishing and therefore for the decline for hammerhead sharks? Like, usually you wouldn't connect the dots that you have anything to do with that. Or any, I don't know, you said that before too. It's so overwhelming. You're like, okay, where do I even start? Like,
I
what can
think
I
I
even
think
do about this?
Yeah, I think you're completely right, and I think it is that when you feel like you're carrying that burden on your sort of shoulders as well as an individual, because even though it's the population of the world as a whole is responsible for the state of the planet, it's also very much down to the micro actions of each individual. And I think it's really easy to almost feel quite like disconnected when you, like you were saying, like when you're in a different part of the world or you see it on the news, you're not connecting that with how that impacts you and directly you, like even things like, the decision to eat fish or not, aside from, for example, aside from the issues that come with overfishing and stuff like that, there's also now a really dangerous issue of bioaccumulation of microplastics that the fish are ingesting, and as a result we're ingesting, and we've got microplastics present at the deepest depths of our ocean, but we also have them on top of Mount Everest. They're everywhere and all at the same time, they're everywhere, and it's kind of like all of these issues that we kind of were looking at singularly, they're all connected, and it's because our ecosystem is connected. So it's like you can't do one thing here without it having an impact on something else over there on the other side of the world. And, sadly, a lot of the microplastics that you may see washing up on your coast, they actually may not be from anywhere near you. They've probably traveled for hundreds of thousands of miles to end up on your doorstep, and it's kind of, everything we do has an impact, and it has like a butterfly effect and a ripple effect throughout the ecosystem. And so it's really hard to take a step back and sort of feel connected enough that you feel inspired to change and take action, but also have some kind of self-preservation where you don't let it, we can't live our lives day to day feeling like the end is here, because we have to step up and we have to make a difference and make a change. We can't all just accept that that's how the planet is now. There's still an opportunity to make a change, and if we all take small actions towards that, we can make a bigger difference.
I want to know a little bit more about the scientific illustrator part. I don't know if that means you are doing sketches for textbooks. I imagine someone doing like anatomical calculations in order to do this. What does that mean?
So scientific illustrations are basically the scientific study. Specifically what I do is like anatomical illustrations. So a really good example of that is I work collaboratively with Bimini Shark Lab in the Bahamas on the Skulls project, and I'm working along them alongside a fantastic scientist and skull preservation specialist called Seisho Song as well. And collaboratively we work together to basically create illustrations of shark anatomy, particularly their head, their jaw, their teeth, the cartilage structure, because what may surprise a lot of people is it's actually one of the most lesser known parts of shark science is their anatomy, because they're so hard to preserve because they are cartilage. So obviously as soon as a shark is deceased, if left for a certain amount of time, the body will just completely disintegrate. So working on that as a scientific illustrator, I remove all of my not all of my creative sort of element to it, but my focus is primarily creating a really true representation of what that looks like. And to me, what it means is painstakingly measuring everything, working back and forth with the scientist to create something that basically accurately represents them. But it can also mean, scientific illustration can also mean an illustration that aids like a piece of research. So for example, like in science communication, which again is something that I'm really pleased to see is kind of on the rise, particularly with social media. So I've worked with charities when they've said, one I did last year, for example, with a charity in the UK called, or an organisation in the UK called Natural England. They wanted to highlight a particular niche ecosystem that we have on a part of the coast here in the UK. So I painted a whole like seascape to illustrate that. So everything was drawn accurately, but it was drawn as a full context image that they could use in their research papers, in their outreach programs, in their education packs that they send to schools, so they can say, it basically supports what's written, and it helps the illustrations help the information become more digestible and more easy to understand. I think without that as well, why it's so important in science communication work is if you're not a scientist, a marine scientist or biologist, you can look at a research paper or something and feel really overwhelmed by all the words and you wouldn't even consider looking at it. But what science comms does, and with the support of scientific illustration, is it makes knowledge and education widely accessible. You know, you can look at the image and you can understand what's going on in the paper. So yeah, it's basically scientific illustration can be quite broad, and I do sort of work in all fields of that. So it's either accurate depictions or to support some like science communication work as well.
Love that. I'm glad I asked because that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I feel like it's so cool to learn about all these little niche things that you can do. I had no idea this was even, I mean, it checks out that there's illustrators for all those things, but I didn't know that this was a job, but an ocean science illustrator.
There you go. Are you considering a career switch?
No, if you would see me draw or illustrate anything, you would not ask that question. Well, we have a last question for everyone, which you might already know what it's gonna be, but we want to know, what is your favorite ocean story? Your most favorite ocean encounter? Whatever comes up to your mind.
From my own experience, it has to be, which is probably for anyone that knows me would know. It's got to be any encounter really I've had with the manta ray. In particular, meeting an oceanic giant manta ray. I can't really pinpoint what it is about them that I love. I just think they're just the most magnificent and majestic creatures, and they look like, you know, that they shouldn't even belong on this planet. So it's really hard to pick one story that I've had with them. And actually something that I'm really excited about is I'm going to be launching a project later this year about manta rays, or not just manta rays, all mobulars. And as part of that, I'm actually going to visit one of the biggest aggregations of manta rays in the world, which I can't even contain the excitement for, to sort of like kickstart the project later this year. So yeah, I think anyone that has the privilege to be able to share some time in the ocean with a manta ray will probably know what I mean. But they're just the most awe-inspiring creatures I've ever been around. And they're so intelligent, and they do that thing that we were talking about earlier when they glide past you, how their eyes connect with your eyes and you feel them checking you out as much as you're checking them out. So yeah, definitely any time I've spent underwater with one of them.
Sounds magical.
The manta rays are making an appearance on this podcast more and more, and now I'm really intrigued. I'm like, I heard that they can do.
One yet?
I never have. I've only seen the stingray in San Diego that stung my friend, so I need a new one.
You need to have a new perspective on race.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely need to replace that with a more positive experience, I think. But they're
For
actually
sure.
quite,
It's on the to-do list.
They're quite a widely, not just manta rays, like different types of like even here in the UK we have different types of rays as well, you know, like they're quite widely distributed species as a whole, and I'm sure there's lots of places near you, but it's definitely an experience I recommend, because I feel like an encounter like that is so special, it kind of stays with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, it's on the list. Back to our list.
Our long list of things we gotta do. We always get inspired. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your role in your journey in the ocean world. It's a super interesting and unique perspective. I don't think we've had anyone on that's shared that perspective. So, really valuable to people. Just like you said, you got to find your skills and what you're good at and utilize that in order to make a difference.
Absolutely.
We will definitely link all of your Instagram, your art, all of that in the show notes. So, and of course on our Instagram. So everyone should be sure to check that out to put a visual. Check out the eyes. I know I'm going to go back and look at all the eyes.
I'm going to scroll through and just zoom into all the eyes now.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be sharing some of that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me on today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you both.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Ocean Stories. If you'd like to follow along on Instagram, you can find us at oceanstories_podcast for updates and behind the scenes.
We'll also be sharing our ocean adventures on YouTube at Ocean Stories Podcast. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
Join us next Tuesday for more Ocean Stories.